The 2023 wide receiver class balled out on Sunday, but we'll tell you who the best value is in the class. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to talk about a couple of wide receivers that you might want to consider buying low on. We're going to talk about some young running backs that looked fantastic in week 9. But Kate, let's start with the 2023 wide receiver class that included Zay Flowers, who had another huge game, Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who finally broke out and had a massive performance. Jordan Addison had a ridiculous touchdown. Of all of the receivers in that class, and it was generally not viewed as a great class, who do you think is the best value in our dynasty leagues right now?
I might be a total sucker here, but I'm still rolling with Jackson Smith-Njigba. I can't quit him. And you know what? I feel like, week 9 was officially the coming out party. It was officially the first time that I feel like we've actually seen him look like a real NFL wide receiver. It's the first time that I was truly reminded of what we saw coming out of Ohio State that made him so special. Let's not forget that there was once a time where he was the best wide receiver on the football field alongside Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, who, despite the fact that, having not contributed a ton in Dynasty, right? Having not contributed a ton of consistent value are still valued as top 12 wide receivers. Let me read you these advanced metric percentiles, courtesy of PFF, from Jackson Smith-Njigba's 3-year career at OSU, which was riddled with some injuries, but had one standout season. 99th percentile PFF receiving grade. 97th percentile receiving grade against a single coverage, 98th percentile separation rate, 96th percentile yards per route run, 88th percentile yards after the catch per reception, 100th percentile contested catch percentage, 81st percentile drop rate. Elite, absolutely elite profile. He creates separation. He is, I think, just kind of embodies everything that you really like. And you look at kind of the position here in this Seattle Seahawks offense, which has trended towards the pass, and that looks like a really nice opportunity to buy low.
Currently wide receiver 26 in dynasty leagues, at least going into the month of October. The only concern I have about JSN is where he falls in the pecking order of this offense, because again, this is a breakout performance with DK Metcalf on the sideline. So as much as I would love to believe that this role is going to continue to be the thing going forward and that he's going to get 13 targets every week, we just know that once Metcalf's on the field, his role diminishes. Unlike, say, Flowers, Kate, who I'm going to go with as the best value, being drafted as wide receiver 25. Zay Flowers was awesome against the Broncos. He had 111 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half against Denver. If you remove the game against Tampa Bay where he twisted his ankle early in the first quarter, he has gone over 120 total yards in 4 of the last 5 games. And again, 4 straight games if you remove that Tampa Bay game. It feels like things are finally starting to click for him in this Baltimore offense. One of the concerns that we had early in the year is that they were using him so much underneath. And in that Chiefs game, he had 6 catches for 37 yards. But now they're starting to use him down the field, and you're starting to see the touchdowns come in. You're starting to see the big plays over the last 5 games, averaging 18 yards per reception. I think Zay Flowers is a bona fide number 1 receiver on the highest scoring offense in the league. I think he's a huge value at wide receiver 25 right now.
I think that's, very fair call out. I'm not here to diminish what Zay Flowers has done. But what I do think is interesting is, again, like the touchdowns can be one of those more volatile things. Not necessarily something we can predict on week in, week out. They're very, very touch and go. And unless you're
Yards are encouraging, though.
for sure. But like outside of those touchdowns, even with some pretty fantastic production, like prior to this week, he hasn't had a top 5 wide receiver finish.
Nope.
He's had just one finish as a top 10 wide receiver, despite a ton of production on one of the NFL's greatest offenses right now. I don't think that the gap between Zay Flowers and JSN should be that close right now. I just don't. I think Zay Flowers definitely has, I think the gap in value in my head is much more different than the ADP data would say. But I think that generally speaking, Zay Flowers, very exciting, but I feel like this is probably going to be like what he is, right? Like, I don't know what JSN, and maybe that's just like what's behind curtain number 3. Because I don't know. I'm looking at the Seahawks, right? And I'm looking at their trajectory. They are coming off another loss. You have 32-year-old Tyler Lockett. Like, is he going to be a focal point of your offense? We've already sort of seen his role diminish here in the 2024 season. It feels like they're one move away from, a giant hole in this offense opening up, and that hole is going to be JSN shaped.
I do want to point out, which is funny, that the narrative going into the 2023 draft was that it wasn't a very good wide receiver class. Like, it just didn't have the Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbor prospects. But in hindsight, you see JSN performing well. Quentin Johnston actually had a really big game this week. Jordan Addison caught a touchdown. Zay Flowers was awesome. And those aren't even the top 3 guys right now in ADP among that class. We had Puka Nacua, who is a top 5, top 6 option. Your guy, Jaden Reed, who is pretty consistently being ranked and drafted as a top 12 player. Rashee Rice was a top 12 Dynasty receiver before he got injured. That 2023 class is actually proving to be a pretty good unit.
Yeah, I definitely think that this has been kind of a nice diamond in the rough situation. And I mean, really, we haven't even necessarily seen the potential of some of these guys. Like, just watching Quentin Johnston yesterday, I just kind of was like, he kind of looks like a real NFL wide receiver right now. And the thing about Quentin Johnston in particular that I want to point out was that I didn't think he came out as a, so I do think there's kind of this intriguing point of, a potential buy low situation, because I mean, most dynasty managers were so far out on Quentin Johnston, far out, so
you get him
done
for nothing this offseason.
Yes. And I think it's almost like akin to some of the narratives that are coming out right now in the real life NFL about the Colts and Anthony Richardson. We knew he wasn't a finished product, right? So that's kind of like, we're like, why are we giving up on Anthony Richardson when we knew you weren't drafting a finished product? Maybe some of that also applies to Quentin Johnston, who's like, I mean, a size, speed, athleticism, total dog. Like, maybe we were a little quick to judge. He's got a great head coach, a really good quarterback. They're coming out of the bye. They're throwing more often. I also think he's a little bit intriguing from an upside perspective, just because, like, I have a feeling that the general consensus is going to be against Quentin Johnston just based on reputation. But again, like if we were expecting a finished product, we just weren't properly evaluating Johnston to begin with.
And really quickly, a couple other receivers from that class. Cedric Tillman, 6 for 75 and a touchdown this week. That's 3 straight games that if you started him, you're very, very happy. Tank Dell had his best performance of the season, going over 120 receiving yards. We had Josh Downs lead the Colts in receiving yards. So again, that 2023 draft class, if you got in on any of the receivers, you got to be feeling really good about it, unless you drafted Jalen Hyatt high. That's about it. Everybody else crushing. Okay, let's talk about some other receivers that have really disappointed this year, including Jaylen Waddle. Is now the time to buy low? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5 APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. It's also the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup alive. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Download the Prize Pick app. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Pick app. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are talking about some of the biggest winners and losers coming out of Week 9. And Kate, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. I want to get to Jaylen Waddle, who, if you started him in your leagues this week, you lucked out. He scored a touchdown, but he finished the game with 2 catches for -4 yards and a touchdown. It's been a rough season for Jaylen Waddle, with and without Tua in the lineup. On the season, Kate, 28 catches for 310 yards and a touchdown. He's been drafted as wide receiver 21 going into the month of October. Is now the time to buy low?
I don't think so, because I think this is more than a product of a lack of Tua, right? Like going back to last year, do you know how many games of 20 plus fantasy points Jaylen Waddle has?
Oh, not very many. 3?
It's 2.
2.
2 total games. Just 5 total games dating back to week 1 of last season with 15 or more fantasy points. That's in full PPR scoring, Marcus. Full PPR, yep. Which that should be Jaylen Waddle's bread and butter. You look at his stats, right? This is the second consecutive season we have seen with a decline in yards per reception average. He is averaging a career low 1.5 yards per route run. Second lowest yards after the catch per reception average. Again, a stat that has declined in each of the last 2 seasons. I don't know what it is. Specifically, we have seen just a slight drop in his slot usage year over year. He started out as a rookie, 60% of snaps played from the slot. That has declined every single year of his career. Maybe that has something to do with it. But again, it's not like a sharp enough decline. I also kind of wonder, like, from a health perspective, it feels like he's always a little bit banged up. It feels like durability is a little bit of a concern. I just think I I don't know what to make of the Miami Dolphins in general. I don't know what to make of Mike McDaniel as a head coach. I think I know what to make of Tua. But Jaylen Waddle, I think we kind of know what he is. And if he is not the primary target within the offense, I think his floor is just so much lower than we'd
Yeah.
like. I mean, again, 22 regular season games dating back to last year. 11 of those, he has had fewer than 10 PPR points. And that is quite a low floor for a guy who's being valued so high in Dynasty just because we know he's really fast. We know there's a lot of talent there, but it's not translating to fantasy scoring. And for a guy who's about to turn 26, can you show me something?
And that was going to be my point. And I'm trying to think about how to say this. 26 is not old by any standard in the NFL, right? Like this should be the prime of your career. But we know in dynasty leagues, like if you just haven't been putting up big numbers and you're turning 26, it's hard to believe that in your age 26, 27, 28 season are suddenly going to be better than what you did as a 23, 24, 25-year-old, right? So I think once, and again, it's this weird phenomenon in dynasty leagues, but once he turns 26, which again is later this month, you're going to see the value crash, not because of what he's doing on the field. That should make his value go down. It's just the combination of the two things. I think people will look at him and feel like he's already reached his peak and it's not going to get any better. I have Jaylen Waddle in several dynasty leagues, Kate. I'm not selling because I feel like if you're selling now, you're going to get 60 cents on the dollar. But he's not somebody that I would want to be buying into either. Like it's just, I would much rather buy someone like Zay Flowers, who is being drafted several spots behind him, or Jackson Smith and Jigba, or Xavier Worthy. I'm not out on Jaylen Waddle, but I'm not in, and I'm not really in either.
Yeah, I'm definitely not in. I would much rather have a DJ Moore, a Drake London. If you're in a rebuild situation, Brandon Ayuk. We know what the ceiling is there. And we know that Brandon Ayuk, when he steps back onto the field, hopefully fully healthy, he's going to be the wide receiver one. And Deebo Samuel might not be in the picture, So like there's a lot of talented wide receivers in this range that have shown me a lot more recently than Jaylen Waddle has. Now, like this is we got the trade deadline coming up Tuesday. Is there any situation where you can envision the Miami Dolphins trading Tyreek Hill?
No, not Tyreek. I think maybe next this offseason they could trade Tyreek. Waddle's not going to get moved because he just signed a long-term contract. Tyreek got a big raise in the offseason. I think they're just going to have to ride it out and maybe make a decision this offseason.
Okay. All right. That was the only thing I was going to say. Maybe that would change some of the value. How about, are there any other wide receivers this week that just fall flat on their face that you're like, how do I proceed moving forward?
Well, Chris Olave, and this one's hard because Chris Olave suffered yet another concussion. I've got to believe this was a bad one. This one, he was carted off. Not to say that they're not all bad, but this one was especially bad. This is his second concussion in 3 weeks.
I think fifth documented concussion since entering the NFL. Like, let's see. I'm looking at his concussion history now. 2020 at OSU, 2022, 2023, 2023, 2024, 2024. Was also, I believe, evaluated for a concussion in between these two recent concussions that he suffered. So like, again, there kind of has to be this point of discussion. Like we've had this discussion with Tua, right? And the documented history for Chris Olave, even more significant.
Yeah.
We had Chris Olave's brother just kind of sound off on Twitter. Like somebody said, is it worth it? He said, not for NOLA, like not for this New Orleans Saints offense. And, they kind of called Derek Carr on throwing some hospital balls that literally
Yep.
became a hospital ball yesterday. You just have to kind of wonder, like, is this the last time we see Chris Olave this year because it's a lost season? I have to imagine that they're going to seriously evaluate how quickly they want him to return to the field. I'm sure they're going to want to progress him through the concussion protocol pretty slowly. But do you remember any wide receiver that pops off your head of like this significant a concussion history so
Mhm.
early on in his career? And how did that turn out?
Yeah, Austin Collie for the Indianapolis Colts back in the early 2010s. He was somebody that was averaging like 75 yards a game playing with Peyton Manning. Suffered, I think, 3 concussions in 1 year. Was out of the NFL a year later. Now, unfortunately, I mean, hopefully that's not the case here with Chris Olave. But even setting aside the concussion part of this, Chris Olave has been somebody that's been routinely valued as a top 10 receiver. Okay, and even in our last batch of Dynasty ADP, being drafted as wide receiver 9, the production has never lived up to that. The best season he's ever had was last year, 87 catches for 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was on pace for about 800 yards this season and 1 touchdown before the concussion this time. I've got to imagine that Chris Olave is going to miss a significant amount of time with this concussion. And if you're asking me whether I want to buy low on that, I don't, because I think we are getting to a really, really dangerous spot that we're at with Tua, where every concussion moving forward, you wonder, like, okay, is this guy going to come back? How long is he going to be out? Even if he's allowed to come back, it's really tough because Olave is one of my favorite players in the league, but this has gone about as poorly as it could have for a player that was a consensus top 15 pick in his class.
Yeah, and again, when you're kind of evaluating it from a fantasy standpoint, obviously we are like health first for Chris
Yeah.
Olave, but when you factor in those risks of every time he takes a big hit, is he going to return to the field? Is he going to be in for an extended absence? Is this going to be the end of his career? You have to wonder, like, is the risk of that worth the upside on your fantasy rosters if you're trying to figure out what to do with Chris Olave? I don't think it is, based on what we've seen, based on the offense that he's tied to, based on the quarterback that he's tied to.
Yeah.
Obviously, those circumstances can change very quickly, but if I can find somebody that's willing to take on Chris Olave in a trade, I'm
I would
absolutely
do that.
selling.
All right, Kate, let's talk about some running backs that had big, big days on Sunday. Let's start with Chase Brown, who we'll get to next. This episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever, wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just sit back and enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's absolutely no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Going to give you some advice. Tonight, Monday Night Football, it's Tampa Bay at Kansas City. Got a feeling Tampa Bay is going to start off hot, and Kansas City always takes a little bit to get going. consider live betting the Chiefs on this one. Once they get down in the game, we know that they're great at coming back. We know that they're fantastic in the second half. Go check out that as the game is going on. Just visit fanduel.com to join today. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is fanduel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, Chase Brown got to start because Zach Moss was out this week. 32 touches for Chase Brown in this game. So if you were worried about whether they were going to give him the full workload, don't worry. Totaled 157 yards and scored a touchdown. Does this performance change how you view the Bengals backfield moving forward?
It's really hard because I also think the Moss injury kind of came out of nowhere. I feel like we don't have a ton of information about it. It is a neck injury, which generally speaking, I feel like neck injuries just always concern me. But
Sure.
looking at Chase Brown's production, he scored a touchdown in 5 of the last 6 games. Finally kind of looked the part. He hasn't been the most efficient back, in this season so far in general. But a solid 4.4 yards per attempt. He's been productive in the receiving game. I think all signs are trending up, and we've kind of been seeing this closer shift, right? Like we've seen them a little bit more willing to utilize Chase Brown in in the red zone, for instance.
Mhm.
We've seen him more willing to utilize him just on a 3-down basis. I think they trust Zach Moss a little bit more in pass protection, but I do think all things are trending up. And yeah, like when you look at a guy who's had 15 plus touches, on 4 different occasions since the end of September, that's pretty intriguing.
Yeah, and we should mention with Zach Moss, it's not been a great year for Zach Moss, and we're fans of his. But of the 35 qualifying running backs, he has the worst success rate in the NFL, 36.5%. He's averaging just 3.3 yards per carry. I do think there's a role in this offense for Zach Moss. He's just the better short yardage running back. He's the better pass blocker. But I don't think there's any doubt that this offense is more dangerous with Chase Brown on the field and with T. Higgins out, with Jermaine Burton not showing up to practice, with Eric All, their backup tight end, now getting tearing his ACL. I think they need this explosiveness, and Chase Brown provides it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a fair point. Eric All, a terribly brutal loss in particular. Feels like he was coming on. The thing is about the Bengals right now, they just need playmakers. And I think, availability right now, kind of a key, a key aspect of that. And if he's the healthiest guy, he's been the more efficient guy. We've seen the Bengals, like the problem for the Bengals this year hasn't necessarily been their ability to put points. The fact that Joe Burrow threw for 5 touchdowns in a game without T. Higgins, I feel like tells you everything you need to know. One of those touchdowns, of course, went to Chase Brown. I think I just kind of want pieces of this Bengals offense, and Chase Brown is an extension of that. So I'm buying in.
One other running back that we need to mention again from the 2023 draft class, it's proving to be pretty good. Devon Achane, 12 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. Now, Raheem Mostert did play quite a bit in this game, got 10 carries, but Achane, 12 carries, 63 yards and a touchdown. Also added in 8 for 58 in a touchdown. And I think that's been the biggest difference this year is the Dolphins' willingness to use him as a receiver. We've seen in all the games this year in which Tua has started and finished, Achane has been unbelievable. In fact, he has scored a receiving touchdown in 3 of the 4 games that Tua has started this year. I think for all the people that were concerned about Achane this offseason, I mean, the injuries are always a concern, but he's producing exactly what we've hoped.
Yeah, I think you have to be extremely, extremely happy with that. I wasn't actually all that convinced when we entered this season that we were going to truly see that receiving ability unlocked. I mean, we saw endless training camp hype about Achan, how they plan to utilize him, but that's come to total fruition here in terms of like what we've seen from him on the field with Tua Tagovailoa. Yeah, you've got to believe in him. He's the real deal. Just really, really impressive. And I mean, even like just having made up so much for what he's missed out for in the absence of Tua. I mean, he ranks third among all running backs with 244 receiving yards this year. Um, just performing extremely well.
Yeah.
One of 8 running backs with 2+ receiving touchdowns this season. Like, you love that. You love the slot usage, like 25% of receiving snaps out of the slot. That's ridiculous, Marcus. I think he's the real deal.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a pretty comfortably a top 10 dynasty running back, Kate. And I think we can have a conversation about just how high he should be ranked. Wait, top 6 feel about right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Much to my, um, wrongness ahead of the season, I was very skeptical. But I think I can concede.
We knew the rushing efficiency would come down because there's just no way he was going to be able to maintain the 8 yards per carry. But having 302 receiving yards through week 9, considering all of the quarterback problems they've had. Okay, here's the receiving numbers that he's had in games with Tua this year. 7 for 76, 7 for 69 and a touchdown, 6 for 50 and a touchdown, 8 for 58 and a touchdown. Like, when Tua's on the field, he's putting up massive, massive numbers. It's hard not to be excited about Devon Achane moving forward.
Devon Achane is what we really wish Jaylen Waddle would be.
Yes.
Is that too soon?
No, it's not too soon at all. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the show on YouTube as well. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier. Enjoy Monday Night Football. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.